marketing advisor. And I want to welcome you to the stage, Tim. Hello, Tim.
Hello, Tal. Great to be with you. Uh, Thank you, everyone. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about some information from my latest book called Unleash Your Primal Brain. Now, I ran a digital marketing agency, for those of you that are not familiar with me, called Site Tuners, and we focused on making websites more effective, what's now called conversion rate optimization. And I wrote a couple of best-selling books, ran an international conference series on that topic called Digital Growth Unleashed. That still happens in the US, UK, and Germany every year. But I'm no longer involved in that. But the value that we created for our clients, over 1.2 billion in documented value, was primarily based on, I would say, durable neuromarketing principles. And so that's what I want to talk today about, not the technology, but rather the evolutionary psychology. And one of the most powerful tools that we had in our arsenal was storytelling. The power of stories is undeniable. But I want to tell you where it comes from. So I'm going to give you the evolutionary perspective on storytelling and why we tell stories and how you'll have to apply it to your marketing, of course, but I want you to see where the power comes from. And again, I'm looking forward to the Q&A. So as we go along, please type the questions into the chat and we'll get to them at the end. Okay, so let's get started. I'm going to tell you today about the primal power of storytelling. Now, what do I mean by that? The primal brain is the one that's in charge of most of your life. We think we're logical beings. We think we make reasonable decisions and we consider all of our options objectively. In fact, there's no such thing. Your brain is here to help you survive. And the brain itself is divided into many evolutionary parts, some of which are more ancient, more fundamental, I guess you could say more useful. Your conscious brain is only awake a little bit of the time. Whatever you think is your conscious reality, your brain is processing, in addition to that, massive amounts of information and trying to make sense of the world. And that's the level that we're going to look at the brain and storytelling today. So let's start with the need for meaning. And I'm going to show you a quick pattern completion. Let's do the one at the top of this screen. We have yellow, purple, yellow, purple, yellow. What do you think goes next? Oh, okay, of course it's purple. That's very, very easy. Let's try the next one. We have blue, light blue, pink, blue. What goes next? That one's not as clear. Or how about we jump down to this one near the bottom of the page? Light blue, dark blue, light blue. Now, it depends on how you interpret the pattern. You could, in your mind, because of the grouping, think there are two circles followed by two rectangles. So because we have another circle, we need to put a second circle to complete the pattern. But what if I were to tell you that the pattern is actually the whole 5 symbol sequence that you see here, that it's circle, circle, rectangle, rectangle, circle? In that case, we need to restart the pattern again and do it that way. So it's not at all clear. There's some ambiguity as to how these sequences work. And your brain, in an attempt to help you survive, is desperately trying to help you tease out the patterns of it. It's always trying to make meaning. How about this? What are the shapes that you see in this picture? How many of them are there? Now, most of you would say 5. Well, Tim, there are 4 circles, and on top of them is overlaid a square. And I would argue with you, and I would tell you that there are actually only 4 shapes in this picture. There are 4 Pac-Man-like black circles with a piece taken out of them, the mouth of the Pac-Man. You made up the square. Your brain created that extra pattern, that extra object, if you will, when it really doesn't exist. And you can do this with layers as well. How many shapes? Well, there's a Mug and David in this picture, right? Well, no, actually there isn't. There are not 2 triangles. There are actually 3 Pac-Men and 3 V shapes. That's it. Your mind filled in the pattern, the layering of objects, the fact that objects exist. Again, it has a desperate need to make meaning out of the world, and that makes sense. All right, how about this next picture? Do you see the beautiful lady? And sometimes I do, but sometimes I see two fighting horses against the backdrop of some hills. Now that's kind of an obvious, you could say, visual illusion or some confusion maybe there. I'm going to show you one that was created a long time ago, over 100 years ago. And I'm going to ask you what you see in this picture. And if you're like most people, you're going to see an attractive, stylish lady from the Victorian days. So here is her jawline right here. Here's her ear. She's facing away. You can see the tip of her nose and the stylish feather in her cap and so on. And then the choker necklace on her neck. Well, some of you might see something different. What if I told you that there's an old woman in the picture and you're not seeing her? Here, so the chin of the lady that we were looking at before, imagine that now as the nose of the old woman, and this is her mouth. And all of a sudden, you see two eyes instead of an ear and a nose. I hope you can see it. Put into the chat if you can also see the old woman. And say yes if you can see the old woman. If not, then maybe you guys need a little extra tea or coffee like me, depending on where you are in the world. The point is that the brain sees what it wants to see. The brain sees what meaning. It tries to create meaning even sometimes when there is none. And stories are a linear form of creating meaning. It's one of the most important things. If there's a picture, if there's an event, it's followed by something, and that's followed by something. Our whole life is causal. I guess you could say we experience everything as being stuck in time. So let me tell you a story, and it's just going to be pictures. Here's the first part of the story. A beautiful lake scene. There's the second part of the story. A man getting nourishing water from a lake. And here's the third part of the story. A couple sitting by this beautiful, quiet lake. So I just told you a story with just 3 pictures. But stories can be very, very different. And what your mind chooses to do with them next, how it interprets them, very much depends on the power of the story. Let's try a similar story. Here's part 1 of the story. Here's part 2. Here's part 3. Bet you weren't expecting that. Sometimes the power of stories is in their surprise. So that alligator lurking in that lake all of a sudden makes that man's decision to take that drink of water out of it a little bit more suspect. And your ancient ancestors on the plains of East Africa would have had to tell these kind of stories. Don't go near that lake. There are alligators there. And that's why you're here today, because your great, 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 great grandmother wasn't eaten by the alligator because her cousin told her about it. So stories are important. At the brain level, the brain is a meaning factory. It has a relentless need to explain the world and to create predictability. That's the whole function of the brain, is create a model of the world that helps me to survive. Let me tell you another story. This one is in the form of coin flips. So I'll take a coin and I'm going to flip it, and we'll see if it comes up heads or tails. Are you ready? All right. It's heads. Let's flip it again. You ready? Oh, look, it's heads again. Let's flip it one more time. Wow, 3 heads in a row. Let's do it again. 4 heads. And let's do it one final time. 5 heads in a row. This is incredible. So what are you thinking right now as I'm flipping these coins? Now, at first, you had a 50-50 chance. You had the heads come up. 2 was, kind of a coincidence. 3 was weird. 4 is getting even stranger. And 5 is ridiculous. You're probably thinking, Tim, you're a cheater. You have a special fake coin that always flips heads. And I would bet that if you flipped it one more time, you're going to get heads again. So what was that? Your mind, your brain making up a story. And no, Adele, the coin doesn't have 2 heads. In fact, 3% of the time, you're going to have this sequence come up. That's right. If you just do statistics, 1/2 times 1/2 times 1/2 times 1/2 times 1/2, 1/32 of the time, about 3% of the time, you're going to have this very thing happen just due to random chance. But where did you go? Adele was basically calling me a cheater. Nice. Okay. Well, what a way to start my morning here in San Diego. So, this is my point though. The brain makes up stories and gets into trouble. It gets into trouble when there is no story to be made up. And this is really important. This is why we have huge industries around the world that are based on gambling, whether it's the lottery or casinos and so on, or sports betting. Now, arguably in sports betting, there's some knowledge of whether it's horse racing or boxing or football that you can bring to it. But the reality is, for casino betting, it's completely random. Again, unless you cheat, unless you have fake coins or loaded dice, there is no pattern to it. But our brain will try to make up a pattern. And that's what gets us into trouble. Gamblers talk about lucky streaks. Well, there's no such thing. The events of one die roll or one coin flip or one spin of the roulette wheel are random. They're completely random. They're independent from the event that came before them. But our mind needs to make up the meaning. And I'm going to get into trouble here, but I'm going to say it anyway. We see the same thing on a social scale, and we see the same thing with complex patterns. And here's a detective evidence board, if you will. And essentially, this is what our minds do. They take all of these unrelated scraps of information, or often unrelated, mostly unrelated, and they try to figure out the pattern of it. That's what gets us into conspiracy theories and cults and so on, and secret knowledge and numerology and all kinds of things, because you just notice one thing that connects one event or one object or one piece of information to another, and you start all of a sudden seeing this giant edifice of meaning. Oh, this must be true. And it's an attempt to create meaning from the world. The problem is when that meaning doesn't really exist. So here's a really key thing about understanding your brain. If we don't find meaningful patterns, our brain is going to impose its own patterns, even if they're false or they don't exist. The brain is a meaning-making factory. So what exactly happens when we tell a story? Well, I don't know if any of you are familiar with the science fiction series Star Trek, but there's this character, Mr. Spock, and he was a Vulcan, and they had this ability to touch somebody else's skull by putting their fingers on it somehow, some weird configuration, and reading someone's mind. It was called the Vulcan mind meld. And I always thought that was a really, really cool concept, to mind meld with someone else and to understand exactly what their thoughts are. Well, turns out that's exactly what storytelling allows you to do. So when you're telling a story, and they've done this with medical imaging, they've seen what parts of the brain light up. So there's the person telling the story, and there's the receiver or the recipient of the story. And it's almost like this telepathic link is created. Here's how language gets synchronized when you're telling a story. First, you have the auditory centers, the sounds of speech. So you can know what language is being spoken. Then you have early language centers that light up, and that's the understanding of words. And then the language centers lined up, and that's the syntax of sentences and how they're structured. And then finally, the higher order parts of the brain also get activated, and that's extracting the meaning of the full story. So when a speaker tells a story, the listener's mind shows the same pattern of activation. Within a second or two, it's syncing up and following along. This is literally the Vulcan mind meld. Now, some of you may say, well, Tim, that's not always the case. How do people communicate if they speak different languages, for example? Well, it turns out that last step, extracting the meaning of the story, is still possible. Even if the sounds are different, even if the words are different, even if the syntax of the language is different, you can still extract the meaning part by hearing a translated version of that story. It's a really, really powerful thing. Now, that's fantastic, but what does it mean to extract the meaning of something? Well, that depends on also who's listening to the story. Let's talk about that next. One of the key takeaways for you as a marketer from this presentation is the following: know your audience. Many of you probably say, well, our product or service is available and makes sense to buy for all 8 billion people on the planet. Well, if that's your target audience, that's not good enough. You have to narrow and narrow and narrow and narrow and bring it down to a really, really tight cultural tribe. And I'll explain to you why. First, of course, I'm going to tell you a story. Now, this story is objective. And what I mean by that is that you could pull out a video camera and record it, and there's some semblance of objective reality happening here. So let me tell you the story. The bullfighter stood still in the center of the arena as the bull moved its feet angrily and got ready to charge. The bull charged, and the matador sidestepped with a deft movement and let the bull go by. And as it went by from above, plunged his sword between the bull's shoulder blades, killing it instantly. Okay, now we can all agree that that's an objective story. Again, you could record that. It's quote unquote reality. But the meaning extracted from that story is very, very different depending on the person hearing it. So let's say you were in Spain and you were a big fan of bullfighting and you grew up with this in your family and had gone to bullfights and so on. So from the perspective of someone hearing that story in that situation, what do you think the meaning of that story I just told is? What are the values, if you will, of that story? Well, you're probably thinking things like diligent preparation, of finely honed skill on the part of the matador, definitely personal courage. I mean, who steps into a ring with a bull? Tradition and a very strong sense of place and of meaning. And finally, honor, that this is an honorable profession. This is an honorable spectacle that we're witnessing, right? So if you're in Spain and you like bullfighting, and that's who I tell this story to, that's likely to be what comes up in terms of the meaning of it. But let's imagine another audience. These are now people that are from PETA, which is the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. They want to prevent and curb abuses of all kinds against animals because they're sentient beings. So when you tell them this story, they're going to experience a very, very different set of meanings that they extract. They're going to think this is barbaric and cruel, that this is torture. The bull never had a chance. In fact, they have these picador guys that take little stakes and put them in its shoulder blades so he can't be as mobile, or they're essentially hobbling it at the very beginning. And then at the end, there's the murder of this helpless animal. And everybody watches and claps and pays money to watch that. So for someone who's in PETA, this same objective story, and that's a really key point, the same objective story is going to have a very, very different meaning. So again, here's my challenge to you as marketers to understand this. Without a common cultural background to interpret stories, the extracted meaning may radically diverge. So I want you to think about who your target audience is. So the biggest takeaway as a marketer for you from this is this: you're doing marketing backwards. You're saying, here's our company, here's our product. We're going to sell it to the whole world, and we're going to, use the megaphone to scream at them and tell them why it's wonderful. Instead, what you should do is the following: pick a very, very narrow niche, a cultural tribe that's cohesive. Understand their values, understand what's meaningful to them, and only then design products and product messaging and offers that plays on that and is effective for them. So it's either your message is either gonna land very, very effectively, or it's gonna get ignored, or worse yet, it's actually gonna be counterproductive. So you can't go to a broad audience. There are very few international brands. There's maybe the Nikes and the Coca-Colas and the Apples of the world, but those took decades and hundreds of millions of dollars to build. You don't have the time, the ability to do that, and you'd have to displace probably one or more of these international brands. So chances are you have a smaller company, you have a smaller niche. How well are you understanding the needs of the audience? How often do you leave the confines of your marketing department? And in pre-COVID days, the people sitting in the cubicle next to you, you're talking about return on ad spend and retargeting and all of these wonderful digital marketing measurable things, but none of you are, or not very often, are you talking about who is our target? What do they care about? How do we better understand them? And what I'm saying is, if you want your stories and your messages to land, you need to focus on a very tight tribe and understanding them. All right, well, let's talk about social experiences. One of the things that stories do, as I mentioned when we had the Vulcan mind meld, is that they allow us to get secondhand experience from someone. One of the biggest industries in the world, in fact, $100 billion a year, is movies. We love movies. And it's a huge industry, Hollywood, and of course, all of the other movie making going on around the world. $100 billion industry. Well, guess what? It's really, really tiny compared to another entertainment industry. And I have two teenagers in the house, and my almost 16-year-old son can attest to this. He would rather spend his time gaming. That's right. Online gaming is much bigger. It's about $180 billion a year. So online gaming is bigger than Hollywood and movie making and all professional sports. That's right. Real Madrid and all the, the Olympics, all of that. You put it all together, it's less than online gaming. And that's because in gaming, we not only have a story, it's a very carefully crafted one, but we have some sense of agency and participation in it. So it's not just it's very immersive storytelling where our actions get to guide the story. But all of this is largely simulation. All of this is social simulation. Have you noticed that even when you have non-humans in a story, they're kind of human-like? I don't know how many of you have seen this movie WALL-E about this dystopian future. Well, there's this little sad garbage cleanup robot, and this garbage cleanup robot is awfully cute. Looks a lot like a person. It's got those big binocular eyes, and it has cute gestures and sounds. And a lot of times in human stories, we have animals, but the animals, like Puss in Boots, have human characteristics. They can talk, or they have emotions, or they have a profession, or they have a personality. They're very, very much human-like, because the most the richest source of information that we have is transmitting stories from our tribal members. So all of our stories are really to help us survive. And if we're going to mind meld, we want to understand what other people did, what happened to them, and so on. And it's very, very important to understand that reality doesn't matter. What I mean is, seeing a cartoon is fine. Seeing a video game is fine. At some level, we know that they're not real, but knowing that a story is fictional doesn't stop the subconscious brain from processing it as real. That's really an important point. We know it's fictional, but we still take it in as experience. And that's it's something that allows us to bypass the logical gatekeepers. So if you're in a business meeting and somebody pulls out the analyst frame on you and says, well, show me the numbers to back that up, the first thing you should do is say, I will, but first let me tell you a story. And you leave them hanging with that storytelling form. And that gets around all of those logical defenses. There is no way to resist a story. We're primed to receive them, to interpret them. And even if they're not real, even if you're telling me a fairy tale, literally, those are some of the most powerful stories around. And they touch on common themes. And love, I mean, some of the biggest movies made are about love. Also relationships. And sometimes, of course, they combine more than one of these: love, relationships, overcoming challenges. And a lot of times movies, is witnessed by a lot of what Hollywood is cranking out today, is about overt power. We are literally talking about superheroes that have extra powers and can do various things. What's the flip side of power? Well, it's subjugation. What happens when someone's oppressed, when they're put down, when they're not treated fairly? How do they overcome this? And finally, the fear of death, which is something that we all face. Some of us can push it off into the dark corners of our mind or not deal with it culturally, but it's there in the background stalking you. So all of these universal themes essentially allow us to practice key survival skills needed in our social lives. We are by far the most hypersocial of all mammals. Robin Dunbar studied this and came up with the famous Dunbar number, but basically human beings form the biggest social groups, about 100 to 200 close people that we can have direct knowledge of and relationships of. And unlike the and science fiction stories and Mr. Spock, most of your cerebral cortex, the neocortex, the big part of the brain, the left and right hemispheres, here I'm demonstrating, I shaved my head for you, the left and right hemispheres are there to process social information. Literally, the moment you stop saying 2 plus 2 is 4 and doing computation or a planning task, you default to social reasoning. You do this in dreaming, you do this in daydreaming during the day, and you definitely do this in stories. And the reason that we need that is because there's a huge advantage to being in large social groups, but there's also corresponding disadvantage. How do you get the most out of the protection of the herd while suffering the least from the drawbacks and all of the hierarchy and alliances changing? That's what social reasoning is. It's knowing, wow, if I did this webinar today and Tal really liked it, then she'll have me back to keynote their live event next year. Oh, but another person that works with her didn't like me before because of something. It's those kind of things. Gossiping and understanding and updating our position in the social tribe is a huge part of what we do. It's the default network in your brain is social reasoning. So stories effectively allow us, almost like the Matrix movies, if you've ever seen that, to download other people's experiences without and understanding where we fit into that social tribe. Now, there was a beautiful movie for which Meryl Streep won the Academy Award back in the 80s. I know most of you probably weren't even born yet, but I was. Anyway, it was called Sophie's Choice, and it was a movie. It's a beautiful movie, but I can't say very uplifting. Essentially, what it came down to is she had to make a decision about which of her two children was going to die and which one would get to live. And she was forced to make that decision herself. Now, I want you to just pause and think about that if that was happening to you. Your two children, and you have to pick one of them to die and the other one to live. How do you make that choice? I hope for your sake that you never have to. I honestly do. But I was able to evoke that just right now by telling you a short story about a movie that I saw close to 40 years ago. That's the power of storytelling. And the reason that it's powerful is that stories allow us to experience these strong feelings and emotions and these radical, dramatic situations without paying a price. When you close the book, when you go to sleep on the camping trip after having heard a story around a campfire, when you walk out of that movie theater into the light of day, you're still alive. You haven't paid the price, but you got the value of downloading that secondhand experience in the form of the story. And in a sense, you got to rehearse it. So for your brain, it was social training. For your brain, it was like, what would I do if I was in that situation? It's simulation of social experience. So that's how you should think about stories. And this ties into our need to be very, very, like I said, highly social. I'm going to expand on this before we get to the Q&A. The key to being human is being a team player. Of course, we're bonded at birth to our moms, and social separation is like the worst thing you can do. They've actually done these experiments with primates where they could give them a drink of milk, or they could have cuddling with mom. They'd rather get the cuddling than the food. That's how fundamental attachment is, especially for people, because we're helpless. We're born as these giant fat blobs of babies that drool and fart and eat, but we're helpless. We can't even walk for a year. I mean, a giraffe drops out of mom, within a half hour it can stand. Within a day it can follow mom around. It can walk. Don't expect that from your newborn baby. My kids were kind of slow to walk, 14 and 15 months respectively, so they took longer than a year. I mean, yes, it's all within the normal range and most of us figure it out eventually, but the point is we're helpless. So if there wasn't a real strong attachment to mom, it'd be a problem. And when we get a little older, we transfer this attachment to others around us. It's no longer about parents. It's about our social group, our extended family, our friends, our chosen relations, if you will. But we still need the social relations. There's no way to avoid it. That is the most fundamental need. If you want to understand how to motivate people again with marketing, understand that being loved and belonging are central to our well-beings. So what tribes do we belong to? I am sure some of you may remember this series of ads that Apple ran, or at least in the US. I'm a Mac, I'm a PC. And it was this dichotomy. Of course, the Mac guy was cool and he was dressed in casual slacker clothes, and the PC was dressed up, but in this kind of frumpy suit, and the corporate drone, the one that had to conform and so on. And it was pretty clear, and they were making fun of the PC people. It's Mac people are cooler, essentially belong to the Mac tribe. Now, some of you probably have iPhones as well, and I have a Samsung phone, and we can talk objectively about why yours is worse, and you're paying to actually remove good features, whereas mine allows me to get work done. And but that would probably start a jihad. I mean, think about it. Telling someone their iPhone is not as good as my Samsung 5G Galaxy S20 Plus, it's actually probably true. It's not, but you belong to a certain tribe, you're part of the Apple cult, and you're not going to receive that information in any kind of friendly or objective way. I also had mixed feelings when I was watching this game in 2014 during the semifinals of the World Cup, when two teams I really loved were going head to head, and Brazil, the purveyors of the beautiful game, got blasted out by Germany. It was more like a basketball score. It was embarrassing. There were 3 different goals scored within about a 2-minute period. It was not good. But I was really rooting for Brazil, but I was conflicted because I also like the German soccer playing tribe. And it's funny because I was once in Australia doing a keynote, and I went to watch an Aussie rules football game, and it was in Brisbane, and it was the Brisbane Lions versus Carlton. And the friend that I went with, she was a Carlton fan going back 3 generations, and she suggested I buy one of their little scarves to wear around my neck, a Carlton scarf. And immediately I put that thing on. I hated the Brisbane Lions. They became the enemy. I was rooting against them. I had no connection to either team. And that's how easily we form into tribes. It doesn't even matter what phone you wear, what phone you use, what shoes you wear, what sports team you root for. Sometimes these tiny little initial starting conditions make us tribal and immediately attached to a tribe. Understand that we will self-select into tribes based on the most trivial differences. It happens automatically. And this was okay when our tribe was our relatives. Again, imagine your great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother on the plains of East Africa. She was probably surrounded by a few dozen relatives. 100 to 200 people was our close groups. And to this day, in indigenous societies in Africa, that's the size of the villages. That's the size that was comfortable for us, that we could have direct relationships with everyone. But guess what? You're probably related to everyone in that group. So as a man, I would have some amorphous relationship of father, cousin, uncle, grandfather, son to everybody else in the group. And that was great because you don't matter. Let me say that again. You don't matter. It's only your genes that matter. You're here to propagate your genes. Life happens at the genetic level, and genes are incredibly stable over long periods of time. They might mix up things a little bit with sexual reproduction to prevent viruses from taking us out. If you were a clone of one of your parents and your parent died of COVID, you'd probably die of COVID too. It's the same genetic material. So you have to shuffle the keys and protect yourself that way. But still, at the level of genes, we're remarkably stable. So we're biased to think at the level of the organism and think you in particular matter. You don't, your genes do. So what does that mean? Well, if I can't protect myself or preserve myself or reproduce myself, I can at least take care of other people that are carrying a lot of my genes. I can take care of my close relations and my tribe. So that was okay when they're literally the only tribe you could belong to was your genetic relatives. But now we have these voluntary and involuntary tribes, and we're in societies of billions of people. So the Samsung tribe that I'm a member of, that's a chosen tribe. The shaving my head tribe, that's a chosen tribe. I was born in the former Soviet Union, that wasn't chosen. My parents were there, and that's where I was born. So we're a combination of different identities, of different tribes, and whichever one is activated at the moment, that's the identity that we align with. Now, the tribalism is so strong in us that we actually have to worry about what other people think of us. No person is an island. Everybody thinks, well, I'm an individual and my particular needs matter. Again, kind of like at the level of genes. No, what actually matters is the society around you thinking you're a good team member. And people's social reactions to us, what's called reflective self-appraisal, it matters a lot. It's like this flood of information of, well, how far are they sitting from me in the meeting? What was that little micro expression that flashed across their face showing disapproval? Oh, they really like that. And let me do that again next time. All of these massive amounts of social information are coming at us from other people, from faces. In fact, we have a special part of the brain that's there just to recognize faces of people we know. And it works faster than our general object recognition part of the visual system. All of this stuff is designed to make sure that we're shaped by other people. And in fact, if we don't do what people around us want, we're going to pay a price. We react with negative emotions towards deviance, even if we're not directly affected by it. So we're all, I guess, self-domesticated, good pro-social people, or we try to be, and we're also enforcers of the social order. So even if we don't know what the social rules are, we know that there are social rules, and we're afraid of being on the wrong side of them. So we're afraid of being shunned. Bad things happen. Ultimately, under severe stress, people will fall back into the social beliefs and rituals of their community at the expense of personal experience or individual initiative. Let me say that again. We will override what our eyes and ears tell us and our own direct experience, because from an evolutionary standpoint, what we can learn from the tribe around us, from the culture around us, is much more powerful than anything we could have reproduced in a single lifetime of our own. So we have to give preference to our cultural knowledge. We have to have cohesive tribes that help us survive, not as individuals. So basically, the history of the world is the history of tribal conflict, one tribe against another. And there was an advantage to being in the tribe. And the most important thing was being a good member of the tribe. If you weren't, bad things happened. And it's this escalating set of sanctions, from gossiping to reducing economic opportunities, confinement, excommunication from the group, and ultimately death in the form of war or execution. So you have to be a good tribal member. Imagine I'm living in pre-Columbian days, 500 years ago, and there are all those maps of the world, and in the corners of the sea maps were dragons and monsters and stuff. And then there was the edge of the world, and if you sailed off the edge, you fell off. And so if I said, I'm not sure the world is flat, and I climbed up on the mast of the ship when we were at sea, and I could see kind of a bend to the horizon. And what I'd say is, hey, we need to talk about this. The world isn't flat. I saw this bend on the horizon. You know what my shipmates would do to me probably? They'd throw me off the freaking ship, because I was wrong? No, I'm actually turned out to be right. The world is flat, and 99.9999999% of people on this planet now understand that reality. There are actually still a few flat earthers around that, hey, like I said, there's all kinds of cults out there. The point is that it's more important for my tribe to be cohesive, for information to spread quickly through that tribe. And that happens only if there's no questioning, if nobody is putting sand in the gears of the machine. Only if knowledge is spreading quickly and reliably and in an unaltered way. So I have to parrot the beliefs of my tribe. Again, we're seeing this in a lot of social conflict, in the politics of today. It's a scary time right now. That's my personal opinion, but it comes from this natural tendency to treat cultural information as actually more important than our personal knowledge. It comes from the advantage of being part of a cohesive tribe, and it's most easily activated during fear and uncertainty. That's when we rely most heavily on our cultural knowledge instead of direct experience. Of course, there's a good side to all this too. When we're productive and when we're cooperative, we can create the most amazing meaning. We can work across millions and literally billions of people to create stuff in civilization that was inconceivable when you were thinking about us a couple of 100 years ago with a rock and a water jug crawling around on the African savannah and hiding from the hyenas. So massive cooperation is only possible because of these stories, because of these shared fictions and myths and abstract concepts that we communicate to each other. So I hope I've given you a sense for the importance of story, but also for its primal origins. And I hope that you use this for good and not evil. I'm going to just give you some more additional quick background. This will all be in the PDF that you guys will be able to download. As I mentioned, I ran a digital agency that was focused on conversion rate optimization, and we created 1.2 billion in value for companies like these. Most of the time, I'm focused now on keynote speaking or solo consulting, as well as writing my new book, Unleash Your Primal Brain, and that's available everywhere in ebook, audiobook, narrated by me, as well as paperback. And I would, if you want to get a free chapter of it, your choice of chapter, go look at the table of contents and then tell me which one you want. I'll send you a PDF of the chapter your choice. There's so much in there, from language, storytelling, culture, gender differences, memory, learning, risk, all of it. I think we're going to get links to this in the chat right now, so check it out. And also, if you're interested in learning more about the basics of how to apply this to marketing, I just dropped my new LinkedIn Learning Neuromarketing course. It's an introduction to neuromarketing. So just go to primalbrain.com/course, and that will get you to my LinkedIn Learning page. And then finally, if anybody's interested in talking internet strategy, whether it's your founding myth, your origin myth, if you will, your editorial voice, who your tribe is, Big View has been kind enough to provide 3 discounted internet strategy consultations. Tal, thank you again for
Yeah,
that.
we're happy to sponsor 3 consultation with Tim. So
Yeah, that are discounted down to $9.99 from $2,500. And now I'd love to take some questions. Please connect with me. Probably the best place to connect is on LinkedIn. You can see all of my information there. If you want to chat, feel free to schedule a meeting as well. And Tal, yeah, I know we had some questions coming in, so
yeah.
I'd love to take some.
Okay, great. Thank you for the presentation. Feel free to ask the questions in the chat now if you have some more. I send the links of team information and the PDF and also Big View's information in the chat, so feel free to check them out. And we have a question from Chris.
Okay, so cognitive diversity is needed for progress. How does one lead given the tribalism? Well, I mean, there's a premise there. Cognitive diversity is needed for progress. I'd say that's a cultural idea that you have, that cognitive diversity is needed for progress. I'm not sure that's actually true, but there is a problem of attaching to too small of a tribe. So one of the recommendations I make, how to be more primal, at the end of my book, is to try to become a member of a bigger and bigger tribe. So the same thing seen through the prism of a small tribe is different. So in the US, for example, we have putting kids, separating them from their parents when they come in asking for asylum and putting them in cages. Now, if you're a progressive like me and you say, look, that's inhumane, that shouldn't happen ever to any human beings, that's one set of values. But if you're more conservative and your tribe is local, then you're probably thinking, well, those people don't look like me. They don't speak my language. They're not the same color. They don't worship in the same way that I do. So they're not in my sphere of concern. So one of the things you should do is stretch, to spend time around people that are not like you, to go out of your way to be uncomfortable. And especially effective for that is if you can expose people to each other directly. If you can travel, if you can make other people travel, if you can put them in circumstances they're not comfortable or familiar with, and have direct experience with someone from another tribe, that is dialogue and exposure to other people is the only way to make your own tribe or your sphere of concern a bit bigger. Yeah, so thank you for that question, Chris.
Great. I see that we have no more questions. We can wait a minute to see if someone else has a question. Feel free to write them right now.
Yeah, don't be shy.
Don't be shy. If you have questions for Tim or for Big View, I will be able to answer. And in the meantime, I just want to thank you, Tim, for the fascinating workshop, and all of you for coming and listening. Yeah, this is it.
Yeah, and again, just go to primalbrain.com/book, and you'll see a link there for any chapter you want. So if you want the chapter on storytelling, which was the focus, of course, of this presentation, I'll be glad to send you that one in particular. So.
Okay, amazing. Okay, thank you, Tim.
It was my pleasure. Thank you, everyone. I hope to see you virtually, or better yet, in person real soon, and give big hugs.
Goodbye, everyone.